Welcome to the DOL podcast. I'm your host, Alejandro Otero, and for today, we feature a conversation around digital learning and a promising framework for instructors to employ in any modality, the whole experience framework. Our guest today is Dr. Morris Thomas, Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs and Professor of Higher Education Administration. Would you mind sharing briefly a little bit about yourself with our listeners?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mr. Otero, for having me here on this episode of DOL Pod. It is definitely a pleasure to be invited, and I'm happy to be here. Well, a little bit about myself is that I am most recently, you mentioned my roles as Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs and Professor of Higher Education Administration, which is at Wiley University, but I most recently just served as the inaugural Assistant Provost for Digital and Online Learning, as well as the Director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching, Learning, and Assessment there at Howard University, where I also was faculty in both School of Education and the School of Business. As far as my work in the digital and online learning landscape, it's been a little over a decade, I believe, where I've been working and serving in various capacities, leading teaching and learning centers. I've given literally, I would say, many presentations and talks around this information, have even been invited to do so internationally and by governments across several continents, as well as an invitation by the U.S. Department of State to host a foreign delegation around digital learning excellence. And so I've really been involved and deeply engaged in this work. Also currently serving on the Quality Matters Academic Advisory Council and served as its former chair, and as well as a member of the CLOE panel, which is a changing higher education landscape of online education, as well. So very deeply entrenched in the digital and online learning landscape.
Wow, that sounds like it. You've got a broad set of experience from different angles here. So, Dr. Thomas, how do you define digital learning?
Digital learning, broadly defined, is an instructional practice that ultimately helps students by making use of a broad range of technology enhanced educational strategies. Digital learning would include various learning modalities that would include in person, virtual, blended, hybrid, flipped, high flex, personalized learning. Really, there is no learning that takes place today that is not and does not include some element of digital or digitization. Digital learning tools are used or relied upon in this practice, and that could include any program, app, or technology that can be accessed via an internet connection. So many times we often think of digital learning in the higher education landscape as just online learning, but again, it includes our various modalities. And I would say one of the most common digital learning tools in the higher education space, even in secondary education as well, would be a learning management system such as Canvas, which Howard University uses, as well as my institution, Wiley University, uses. But there are also others. Some institutions have customized learning management systems or LMS, but we also have some of the other big LMSs are Desire to Learn, Moodle, Blackboard, etc.
From your experience, what does digital justice look like in the learning environment context?
Before I talk about digital justice, it's really important to understand what we mean by justice. Justice in the educational context would require an institution, faculty, et cetera, to understand that they want to ensure equitable access, opportunities, and outcomes for all learners with a capital ALL for all learners. It isn't just about equality, so to speak, but it is about giving everyone the same thing, but about equity. And equity recognizes that some students come with different needs, barriers, and starting points. And we want to ensure they all have what they need to succeed. So justice involves dismantling systems and practices that create or perpetuate disadvantages while building structures that would empower all learners to thrive in these environments. So, an example of equality versus equity is in an equality standpoint, the text or the materials available that everyone has the ability to go out and access or purchase the text. Well, equity would understand that not all learners necessarily has the ability to afford and get text. So you start thinking about other ways to provide access, whether that be providing open educational resources, putting measures in place to make sure that the materials are affordable or that the learners actually have the resources to obtain them. So it's another step when you think about equity and when you think about justice. It is making sure that everyone has what's needed. Another thing I would mention about justice is that it represents intentional design of the learning experiences that leverage these digital learning tools to expand the access, opportunity, and engagement. It creates equitable and accessible learning environments which reach learners across various contexts, their circumstances, and modalities. And justice-oriented practice considers not just whether students can access the technology, but whether they can access quality, cultural responsiveness, and a humanistic or a humanizing learning experience through these digital means.
This brings me to your work on the whole experience framework. If you could, please explain the whole experience framework and how it promotes and supports digital justice.
Thank you for the questions. So, the whole experience framework was actually created by myself a few years ago because there was so many of these conversations on the how so to address all these students. There's language that now has become politicized when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and things of that nature. And before the political nature of that terminology, the notion around diversity, equity, and inclusion was really to think about that we have these different learners who have these different needs and how do we include all of them in the learning space. And so the whole experience framework was providing a model or a lens to provide a barometer or a a metric, so to speak, for the instructors, the learners to look at what was taking place in these environments through what is called reflective practice, where people can take a chance to pause and think about what changes they might make to improve whatever their practice is. And in this case, we're talking about learning environments. And so the whole experience is thinking about this ever evolving landscape of higher education. Our learners are vast and things are changing very rapidly. Learners are not traditionally coming to brick and mortar in the 9 to 5 time frame, all being the same age, all having or not, all being full time or not working. It really does change. And so to provide this whole, it really has changed and it's changing rapidly, even more so. So to think about what it looks like to have a whole experience, and whole is an acronym, we have I created a model that has 5 components that can discuss what is needed to help make these environments more, learning environments more just, so to speak. And so the whole experience does have 5 components, as I mentioned, and they are welcoming, which really focuses on the learning environments being hospitable. And hospitality really does look at elements of safety, of having all the needs being there for that particular reason. If you think about when you're hosting or being hospitable to someone, what is needed? How does someone feel welcome? What are all of the components or elements needed for that particular encounter or engagement or environment? The another element of it is holistic. which considers the whole person and all of the situational factors impacting their learning. And so that varies from time to time, depending upon what's happening in the world, depending upon what's happening in their geographic locations, et cetera. Another component is O or open, which deals with feedback and communication. You want to make sure that there is clear, transparent, and honest communication with regular feedback loops for everyone involved in the learning environment. Then we have liberating, which speaks to the flexibility as well as universal design for learning. You want to make sure that a learning environment is not overly rigid. I like to say that rigidity does not equate to rigor. And if we consider the universal design for learning, we're looking at the multiple means of representation, expression, and engagement, so that there's various ways to meet different learners where they are. We want to be learner ready as opposed to making sure that our learners are only the learners who are ready can be successful. So we want to create our environments where our learners actually, well, we're ready for our learners in their various forms. And then lastly, but not least, there's no hierarchical order of these or sequential order. They can be used or leveraged simultaneously and interconnected. But the last component is empowering, which deals with learner agency. You want to increase the capacity of individuals or groups to make choices and transform those choices into their desired actions and outcomes. So not only are we providing the learning outcomes and learning objectives or the content that they need, but we're providing a learning experience that allows them to create and craft some of their own goals while they're going through the learning experience. So that's the whole experience summarized somewhat in this context of digital justice.
Just to summarize again, we've got the five components being welcoming, holistic, open, liberating, and empowering. How can the whole experience framework and digital justice be used to promote quality within higher education?
So one of the most significant contributions the whole experience framework does is it operationalizes some key steps or principles that might otherwise feel abstract or overwhelming for those when they're thinking about, okay, well, how do I address all of these different learners? And so I also mentioned earlier that I worked with Quality Matters, which is the leading global organization on preparing digital learning environments, whether it's through the rubric that where has these specific standards, these general standards, and also specific standards that speak to the design of the courses. But in integrating the whole experience with quality assurance standards that Quality Matters provides us with, I believe it's about 8 different standards that deals with standards of quality in a course, or 8 different quality assurance systems. And I'll just quickly go through those first and then talk about how the whole experience framework can help those. So Quality Matters mentions that course design, course delivery, course content, institutional infrastructure, the learning management system, faculty readiness, and learner readiness are all standards of quality. And so if you think about those, and I'll go back and revisit each one of them to talk about how the whole experience can help with those standards of quality. So we think about course design, the whole experience framework speaks to how to make your courses more welcoming, holistic, and inform inclusive learning design within that. Then course delivery, it speaks about elements as the open aspects, which deals with having that open line of communication, as well as being liberating and having some elements to guide facilitation. When it comes to course content, the empowering component of the whole experience is really important because it speaks to ensuring the relevance and representation is involved. If you think about institutional infrastructure, the whole experience, all 5 of its components really speak to that. The learning management system, which is the technical platform, it really does allow to facilitate or enable the whole experience's practices. Faculty readiness is a big part of quality assurance, and the whole experience can really make sure that professional development is grounded in the framework so that faculty get a chance to, again, through reflective practice, think about how their courses are not welcoming, are not holistic, open, liberating, empowering. And then learner readiness, you want to, the whole experience really supports services to help students navigate the digital learner. And then learner readiness, what I am positing is that we go more from the lens that learners have to be fully ready when they engage or enter our learning environments, to the point that our environments are ready for various types of learners, to serve various types of learners. So that's us being ready for the evolving landscape of higher education, that's having many different types of learners come to our institutions.
And then, so what are some of the practical implications someone can immediately adopt to implement digital justice as you see it?
Sure. So I'll give a few under each component. So for welcoming, you want to think about the tone of the course. And so we do, I think, a great job of this in higher education, mostly in our initial class session. But then there are, depending upon how many weeks are in your semester or your class, there are all of these other times that we're engaging the learner. And I don't know that we're considering how to make sure the environment is still on a continuous basis, fostering being welcome, welcoming, having a sense of belonging, having a sense of community, having a sense of safety. And so you could do the welcoming through various messaging or prompts, not only in the first week, but throughout the activity, semester, or course. Think about activities that build community. So having the content and the assignments and the activities also build community, and always be cognizant of the tone of the assignment, not just your individual tone, the tone of the reminders. One thing that I do in courses that deals with navigation, but also deals with welcoming, is I consistently remind the students of how much they've already achieved, and to show them that what they have achieved is an indicator of that they can get through the course without it just means the course is just happening. And those small, I would say, actions like that can really be impactful on a social aspect and on a motivational aspect. And these are all different components of facilitating learning that's really important. Depending upon how the environment or the tone is, can really determine whether or not a student stays motivated or stays engaged. On the holistic aspect, really looking at the courses calendars to support student planning, making sure that you're aware of the various situational factors of what's happening. So for instance, we know that our learners are adults. And so we have courses where there's a major event, whether it be cultural holidays or voting or things of that nature, that we're not absent or tone deaf to those real life obligations that learners have. Our courses can't become so egocentric that we forget about the other things that are taking place within the context of our learners' work. When it comes to open, making sure that there are multiple communication channels, that rubrics and feedback mechanisms are there, as well as clear learning objectives and expectations are provided, and then provide real time ability for learners to give you feedback on their experience. Then in the last two, liberating, when I think of liberating and I think about learner success, I'll go more on the assessment aspect. We have to make sure that learners are only receiving and or being assessed in one way. Everything should not be a verbal lecture or a written paper assignment. What are some authentic assessments that can take place? What are some assessments that can show those who may not write as well, but they might speak better? Are there assessments where they can do things to speak? And so, for instance, almost every course uses a discussion board. Can your discussions also use voice threads in addition to written? Can discussions also use images? Can discussions be generated by the learners? It's just thinking about different ways to do what we're already doing, but include that UDL or universal design for learning principles with it, where you can do it in multiple means of representation, expression, and engagement. And then lastly, empowering. We want to make sure that our learners' work actually is relevant to them. Where are the real world applications? Do they have student choice and agency in their work? And then do their skills transfer beyond the course? So those are some elements and some ways to apply it. And I would say this, Mr. Otero, is one of the last things about this. This isn't really a meant to be a check off, like to say, I've done this, and it's there. Is again to be reflective practice, to think about what you already are doing in your courses and then stand them up against for this particular model and reward yourself, so to speak, or give yourself some kudos on where you're doing these aspects, and then look at, oh, these are some areas where I may not be considering the learners as the whole experience of the learners. So I may not be as liberating, or I may not be as empowering in an area. I will add, one of the first studies on the whole experience framework is published in the Journal of Educational Research and Practice. And that particular article, the faculty who was using the whole experience framework provides feedback to say that there were several elements of the whole experience framework that they were doing very well. However, they found one area where that was just not their ideology around it. And so they were able to adopt and think differently about how to do those things to improve that. And they saw when they did make some of those adjustments or shifts, it doesn't mean that everything is wrong, but just those small adjustments or shifts, they were able to see benefit with that within their course.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Thomas. It's been great talking with you, and I know that our listeners are going to get a lot out of this conversation. And with that, we'd like to thank our listeners for enjoying this episode of the DOL Pod. Take good care, and we'll see you on our next episode.